Good morning. It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, August 13th, 2024, and I'd like to call to order the board meeting for the Tennessee Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. As we begin the meeting, I would like to bring to your attention there is a sign-in sheet on the table by the door. And for anyone that would like to make comments about an agenda item, please indicate by your name as you sign in. Public comments will be accepted near the end of our board meeting. Ms. Bohannon, would you please call the roll?
Don Haynes.
Here.
Chris Lee.
Here.
Randy Nash.
Here.
Wendell Naylor.
Here.
Scotty Porsche. Pam Stevens.
Here.
Tim Willer.
Here.
Ms. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. I'll now entertain a motion to review and accept the agenda as been submitted to you all.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Motion to accept by Mr. Lee, a second by Mr. Wheeler. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any other discussion about the agenda? Before we move on to our regular part of the meeting, I would like to say congratulations to our legal Troy Bryant on his recent marriage. And we also, as a board, would like to say to Tim Wheeler, we continue to keep you in our thoughts and prayers with the recent loss of your sweet mama. As we move on, the minutes have been sent to you all previously. I will at this time entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Haynes and a second by Mr. Nash. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any further discussion regarding the previous minutes from June 11th, 2024? Motion passed to approve the minutes. This time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Troy Bryant with our legal report. Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
Thank you. Good morning, board members, and thank you for that acknowledgement. I really appreciate that, and just it's the 3 weeks of married life has been great so far. I'll update you in September how it's going.
Okay.
So the first complaint we have is complaint number 2024-033-031. This case was administratively opened following a routine inspection conducted on May 20th, 2024. During the course of this routine inspection, the inspector observed the following. The manager of respondent establishment's funeral director license expired on March 31st, 2024, and was not renewed until April 9th, 2024. However, the inspector found no evidence to suggest that arrangement conferences or services had been conducted during that time period. Respondents stated on March 9th, 2024, both license renewal forms, one for their funeral directors and one for their embalmers license, were sent to the accounting department for the company the manager works for. On March 14th, 2024, they received an email from the accounting department informing the manager that the license had been renewed. On April 8th, 2024, the manager discovered only the embalmer license had been renewed, but not the funeral director's license. On April 9th, 2024, the fee and late penalty for the funeral director license was paid. The manager stated, quote, "Obviously, I did wait on several families during that week, but had no idea that I was doing it unlicensed at the time," end quote. As a note, the manager in question for this establishment is also a funeral director for the respondent establishment in the next complaint. Based on the evidence and documentation obtained during the inspections, it appears that the admission, "I did wait on several families during that week," occurred not with this establishment, but with the establishment that's in complaint number 2. So based on the above, we would recommend a letter of warning.
Are there any questions for Mr. Bryant regarding this case?
Motion to accept council's recommendation.
Second.
There's a motion by Mr. Lee, a second by Mr. Nash. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any further discussion? With none, this has been, motion passed.
Next complaint is complaint number 2024-033-041. This case was administratively opened following a routine inspection conducted on May 20th, 24. During the course of this routine inspection, the inspector observed the following, which again was the same individual, had a funeral director whose license had expired March 31st, was not renewed until April 9th, and during the time that the employee had an invalid funeral director's license, that employee acted in the capacity as a licensed funeral director, including but not limited to arrangement conferences for 3 decedents. And the respondent's response was essentially identical from the previous complaint. So based on the above, we would recommend a $250 civil penalty to be authorized via consent order and a formal hearing if necessary.
Are there any questions for Mr. Bryant?
I've got a quick question.
Mr. Nash?
Maybe I skipped over this. So the first one was against the establishment, correct?
Correct.
And the second one is against the establishment?
Yes, so it's a little confusing. I had to dig into it myself, but so my understanding is that this individual who is respondent number 3 in the next one operated as manager of establishment number 1, and it was just a funeral director
I
at
understand.
establishment 2.
I understand. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the recommendation.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Nash, a second by Mr. Lee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any other discussion? With that being said, this case, motion approved.
Next complaint is complaint number 2024-033051. This case was administratively opened following a routine inspection conducted on May 20th. And again, the respondent is the individual identified in the previous 2 complaints, manager of first establishment, employee of the second. Only evidence of unlicensed activity found during the unlicensed week from March 31st, 2024 to April 8th, 2024 was the 3 arrangement conferences for the 3 decedents. And again, respondent's reply was identical to the previous 2. So based on the above there, we would recommend a letter of warning.
Are there any questions for Mr. Bryant?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Mr. Nash?
Second.
Mr. Naylor with a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any other discussion? With that being said, this case, a motion approved.
The next one is complaint number 2024-023611. Complainant alleged that respondent had failed to send the cremains and remaining insurance policy funds to them. The complainant was the granddaughter of the decedent. However, complainant did not provide any next of kin information and whether they were entitled to receive the cremains or the remaining funds. Respondent did not reply to the complaint. Legal called the complainant and inquired about next of kin determination. Complainant stated that she did have a father involved in the arrangements, but that the insurance policy listed them, the complainant, as the beneficiary. Complainant stated that although their father made determinations as to the arrangements, complainant was listed as the policy beneficiary. Complainant explained that they had asked the funeral director if it was possible to send some cremains to her as well, since her and her father lived in different states. Complainant stated that the funeral director confirmed this would not be an issue. Complainant updated legal. They still have not received any contact from respondent regarding these matters. I also asked the complainant whether they had documentation showing the insurance policy, and she admitted that it might be a little tricky for her to find at this point, and I told her if she finds it to send it my way, and have not received anything as of now regarding that. So based on the above, we would recommend a $2,000 civil penalty related to unprofessional conduct and for failure to respond to the complaint, authorized via consent order in a formal hearing if necessary.
Any questions for Mr. Bryant?
I do. Go ahead, Tim.
Go ahead.
You still haven't received any response from the respondent at all?
I have not. I called several times, sent an email to the email that we have on file, and have not received any response.
On there, did you happen to look at their previous complaints that are on here, these disciplinary history? Did they do the same thing as far as not responding to those?
My understanding is that that was not an issue before. I know usually that is included in the disciplinary history if they have a pattern of not replying.
Okay. Thank you.
My question, Troy, do we know what the insurance policy was worth, that the funeral home was the beneficiary?
We do not. That was not included with the information that the complainant had available, and I was hoping to be able to get that information from them if they could send that paperwork, but unfortunately I have not received that at this time.
So the funeral home didn't send you?
No, the funeral home did not. The complainant did not. I've got no concrete paper trail on any of that, unfortunately.
Okay.
So my question is, who got the cremated remains?
So I guess logically it would be one of two things, and unfortunately we're in the speculation portion since I haven't heard from complaint or respondent. I think most likely is that, or what complainant seems to think has happened, is that the respondent still has them in their possession and just hasn't sent them. I suppose what could also be possible is they were sent to complainant's father, who is the next of kin, and they just failed to abide by the wishes that a portion gets sent to the complainant. Then we get into the whole issues of, was father aware of that? And I think that gets so much into conjecture, it's difficult to say. But so unfortunately, I wish we had a direct answer on that.
One other question on that. Was an investigator sent out to investigate this at the response?
Not on this one, in that, so when filing complaints and claims, courts of law, everything, when a person fails to respond, it acts as a non-denial. So what our plan is assuming whatever amount the board assesses for a civil penalty, when we mail the consent order out, if it bounces back and we don't get something, we'll send someone to physically get them the consent order to make sure they have it. Because while the information would be helpful, at the end of the day, a certain violation because they did not respond within the 2-week time period and had ample opportunity to do so. And then also, at the very least, even if they've done everything correctly and complainant just wasn't aware, a violation of professional conduct for failing to, at the very least, just keep them in the loop.
Did anything come back, the respondent, was anything sent back or anything as far as like a return mail or anything like that? Or?
I can double check that. I know we always send, my understanding is we may send regular mail. I know we email, and I know we send certified. Let me check on our green card. Okay, all I have in the file, I do have a green card, but it doesn't appear it was signed for. So I guess that could, as unfortunately is the theme with this complaint, that could mean a few things. It could mean they did receive it via regular mail and just never signed on the certified end. But I will say that, as a licensee with our department, you need to be available by that email as well.
Yeah, and then if the address had changed, they'd be required to notify. As the address
Exactly.
changed.
As an option as well, if the board feels, like I said, I feel very comfortable with, at the very least, didn't respond, that's a violation for certain. And even if they've done everything correct and we're just not aware, the unprofessional conduct of not notifying the complainant. If the board would feel more comfortable with sending an investigator out to get that further information, that's certainly an option. Would leave that up to the board's discretion on that.
Madam Chair, I would feel comfortable if we went ahead and authorized an investigator to go out. Not just speaking for where I work, when we ship any cremated remains, we do it by certified mail and everything. We have a tracking on everything. So I feel somewhere along the lines, the funeral home should have something that they did with these cremains, and I think that needs to be dealt with. I'd also like to know what the insurance policy was with. Did the funeral home have a $100,000 policy on this man and the family was charged $2 and they kept $98,000? There's a little questionable on that right there.
Yeah. Mr. Wheeler is making a motion, and you all heard the motion to table this until after the investigator identifies more information. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, hear a second from two people. Let's- Mr. Wheeler and then Mr. Haynes, second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No
It's always me.
discussion.
I don't know what kind of direction the investigator can be given, but I just want to make sure that we get all the questions answered as far as the insurance information and speaking with the complainant even again, because, I mean, we all know this, that, you know, the beneficiary could have been changed without her knowledge if it was the grandfather's insurance policy. There's things that could have happened there. But just the complete non-response to not only the complaint, but the complainant. I just feel like there's something's wrong somewhere, but I just want to make sure that we get the questions answered of that, like Tim said, that, you know, the insurance information, and then, of course, where the cremated remains are, and, you know, who signed the authorization, you know, a little bit of everything, I guess.
That's good advice. So there's a motion on the floor and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That being said, this case is being motion approved.
The next complaint is complaint number 2024-032791. This complaint is verbatim identical to the one above and was received several weeks after the preceding complaint. The preceding complaint was originally filed with the Attorney General's office and then referred to the department. The second complaint was opened when complainant contacted the department requesting an update. As such, the board's determination in the previous complaint is sufficient for the purposes of this one as well, so we would just recommend closure on this one.
I'm just guessing that the complainant is one that contacted the Attorney General's office.
Correct, yes.
If we handle it and through the investigation, if anything comes up on the criminal end, I guess we would make them aware of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. That's all. I want, just looking out for the complainant, since she has got no answers, so thank you.
Mr. Bryant, should we keep this one open until the other one is finalized, or go ahead and go with your recommendation of closure?
I would request closure in the sense of that even if we get, I guess, hypothetically 10 complaints all with kind of the same thing, we just need one to take an action. And that, to be honest, I haven't seen something like this where we'll have people kind of check in and request an update, which we're happy to give them. But I've never seen that result in a complaint being opened. And I think that's because it started with Attorney General's office and came to us. So I think in this sense, the previous one is sufficient. We got no additional information in this one that needs to stay with this file, so to speak. So I think in this instance, closure would be appropriate.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Bryant?
We hadn't had a motion yet, have we? I'll make a motion for closure on that complaint.
I'll second.
Have a motion by Mr. Lee and a second by Mr. Nash. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
The next two complaints are complaint numbers 2024-026711 against the respondent's funeral director's license and 2024-027651 against the respondent's Embalmers license. These two complaints are verbatim to a complaint the board heard at the June meeting involving a funeral director allegedly holding a handgun and using profanity, claiming they were looking for someone. The contact information comes from the same town in Alabama, which suggests they are from the same part of the family. The wife of the decedent described as, quote, estranged. Complainant provided no additional information or supporting evidence than had been given in the previous complaint, and based on that, we would recommend closure.
Any questions for Mr. Bryant?
Motion to accept council's recommendation of closure.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. We have a first by Mr. Lee, a second by Mr. Wheeler. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
Next complaint is complaint number 2024-027661. This case was administratively opened following a routine inspection conducted on April 24th, 2024. During the course of this inspection, the inspector observed the following. There were several issues with the general price list that required correction. The embalming disclosure statement and the direct cremation disclosure statement on the general price list needed to be corrected. No casket price list could be offered with correct information during the inspection. No outer burial container list could be offered with correct information during the inspection. And the reason for embalming was missing on 9 contracts that were reviewed. Respondent stated that on the general price list, all disclosure and wording discrepancies have now been corrected, and that the ranges listed had also been updated to reflect the options available, and to reflect the prices notated on the caskets on display in the showroom. Further, the pre-need sales agent license of a pre-need sales agent cannot be presented during the inspection. Excuse me. Although the individual was not working at the time of the inspection, after several calls to the manager of respondent establishment, no license could be produced. Respondent replied stating that this registration has now been posted to the main office wall. And finally, the current license for the crematory used by respondent was not available for inspection, and respondent replied stating that this license has now been posted to the main office wall. Based on the above, we'd recommend a $500 civil penalty, authorized via consent order, and a formal hearing if necessary.
Any questions for Mr. Bryant? I have a question. Is the civil penalty related to unprofessional conduct or the fact of not having corrections on their disclosure?
Yes, so it wouldn't be unprofessional conduct in the sense of, I know there is a rule that we have regarding, the language feels harsh, but it's, misleading information. That's what all those disclosures are meant to cover. So it would cover that, as well as we have a specific statute where those registrations need to be posted. So not unprofessional conduct in that regard, but there is a specific rule and statute that triggers.
The reason I'm asking, Mr. Bryant, is because of the disciplinary history. Wouldn't there be something that needs to be notated of why there is a civil penalty attached to this case?
Yes. So whenever when the board approves a civil penalty, I go and draft the consent order, and a section of that consent order is conclusions of law. And in that section, I list the statutes or rules that have been violated. So the respondent, it's always clear to them what has been violated in this regard, and then that's uploaded to the disciplinary history from there.
Okay, that's for future boards so that they have some sort of information.
And I think that's a good sign that you had to ask that question, which means you don't receive any of those consent orders. So that's a good sign.
Yeah. So any other questions?
Got one. I'm assuming this is kind of a rhetorical question. That the investigator does follow up to make sure these discrepancies were taken care of?
Yes, my understanding too is that it's whenever the inspector goes out on a routine inspection next time, it triggers 2 checks. One, just this was a problem last time. Is it still a problem? And 2, there's always a no included of if it's a violation that was found on a previous inspection. That's always included, so I know to let the board know that this has been a recurring issue.
Any other questions?
Motion to approve council's recommendation.
See, wait a minute, I have Mr. Naylor down. No, wait, no. Motion, who was the motion? I'm sorry. Mr. Haynes. Second by Mr. Naylor, thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed. Okay.
The next complaint is complaint number 2024-029031.
Madam President,
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna have to accuse myself.
Yes, sir. You can step right out that door right there, and we'll come get you once this case is heard. Don't trip over yourself here.
We got the flag.
Mr. Bryant, if you will proceed.
Yes. And again, just for the record, complaint number 2024-029031. Complainant, an employee at respondent establishment, alleged that the establishment employed an unlicensed minor for the past 2 years. Alleged that another employee of respondent establishment claimed he did not have to undergo a background check like other employees. That an employee had a prior conviction prior to working with the respondent establishment, and alleged that the other employee dresses decedents in costumes, quote, to try and scare coworkers for his own amusement, end quote. The manager of respondent establishment responded on the establishment's behalf. The manager provided that a teenager was hired to work at respondent establishment through a youth outreach program. The teenager was compensated for work performed, which included cleaning out cars after services and other tasks that would not be considered licensed activity or that required any direct contact with the families or decedents. The manager stated at that time the teenager's employment was on an at-need basis, but now was a field operations support assistant and a full-time employee of respondent establishment. Next, the manager assured that both the teenager and the employee complainant referenced had undergone background checks. Further, the manager vehemently denied that the employee dresses decedents in costumes, stating that the employee only dresses decedents in clothing provided by the family in anticipation of services. Finally, the manager stated that the former conviction of the employee occurred in 2013 and was disclosed to the board during their application process. The employee was granted a valid license to practice funeral directing after a full disclosure. The manager stated they believe complainant's complaint to be a retaliation for a misunderstanding at the establishment. The manager detailed a conversation where they explained to complainant that a location was overstaffed and that they did not have enough work for complainant, but in lieu of reducing complainant's hours, they were exploring the option of moving complainant to an affiliated funeral establishment. Manager stated following this conversation, complainant did not show up for work, and that the manager believed complainant had misunderstood the conversation, thinking complainant's employment had been terminated. The manager provided this conversation took place on May 14th, 2024, and the complaint was filed May 20th, 2024. The manager stated that since May 14th, 2024, complainant had not returned to work. Based on the above, complainant has not met their burden to establish that a violation of applicable rules or statute has occurred. Therefore, we would recommend closure.
Are there any questions for Mr. Bryant? I have a question. This is just for my own personal education.
Sure.
What is a field operations support assistant?
I am not entirely sure.
Okay,
It sounds like a nice title, though.
Thank
I
you.
think that's a funeral home assistant.
Okay, funeral homes, okay.
I think he's right.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had that underlined in my notes here. I wasn't real sure what that was. Was the complainant a funeral director as well?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Any other questions for Mr. Bryant?
I make a motion to approve the recommendation.
Mr.
Second.
Nash, Mr. Lee. First by Mr. Nash, and then a second by Mr. Lee. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carried. Mr. Naylor will now return to our meeting. I do think these desks have been scooted in closer. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Our next,
Next complaint is complaint number 2024-033011. This case was administratively opened following a routine inspection conducted on May 23rd, 2024. During the course of this routine inspection, the inspector observed the following. The area situated directly behind and beside respondent establishment contained debris and other materials and obstacles. The inspector also observed that there was an older refrigerator/freezer that was not secure. Respondent stated that since opening in mid-2023, due to the surplus of business, they have begun several upgrades to the facility, including a new preparation room, new visitation area, an enlarged chapel, a new selection room, and a new office. Respondent acknowledged the presence of debris and materials behind and beside the funeral home and stated that the area was temporarily used to store scrap materials and items displaced during the ongoing construction work for the renovations. Respondent stated they mistakenly did not recognize the rear side of their building as a public area per the rules. Respondent stated following the inspection, they have cleared and disposed of construction scrap, items such as tin, wood, and other materials from the identified areas. Items moved outside to facilitate construction have been moved to private areas inside the building, and essential items have been organized and condensed to a designated area between building, ensuring compliance with the public area standards. Based on the above, we'd recommend a $750 civil penalty authorized via consent order and a formal hearing if necessary.
I'm going to guess with some type of renovation going on, that it's not that simple. It evidently had to be just an eyesore and not just stored.
Yes, that's my understanding, that it was the accumulation was pretty significant.
Other than the inspector, were there other complaints with the city?
There were not, no. This was an follow-up inspection that, if you notice, the respondent in their disciplinary history, they've come before the board a few times. This was the one where the board approved kind of interim re-inspections to check and make sure.
From back in April?
Correct, yes. So no complaints from anyone else as far as we're aware about the debris in the public areas, but it was discovered during this inspection.
Any other questions?
My question would be, so that was April, this is
August.
May, and that was August, but this was conducted in May, so let's say a month after that. Was that, I guess the time frame and how long that stuff was there? Was it there in the previous inspection? Did the inspector notate that anywhere?
My understanding is that it was not. If it were, I know that's something the inspector definitely would have included and would have been brought before the board at that time.
I feel like there's a couple of questions there that, the one is how, when were those renovations taking place? Because they just opened in mid-2023. How long was was this debris and these other things outside? I mean, I realize it could be an eyesore, but I feel like the inspections are obviously something we asked to be done, but this seems like it's a little bit of a reach to me. That's just my opinion.
And I think that's perfectly valid as well. One thing that I guess the logic behind the higher civil penalty recommendation is just kind of the consistent nature of, one thing I will say, I mean, I don't mean this to make light of it, but I do think it's accurate. The fact that our inspector went out and this is all they found is, some level of improvement, I suppose.
I agree with that.
But if the board feels the 750 is too high, that's perfectly fine. If, leave that all up to your determination.
I guess my thing is I don't feel that the other inspections, the purpose behind those other inspections is to cite them every time that they go out there. And I feel like that's just, this is not related to any of the previous issues.
Mr. Nash, I think I understand what you're
yeah.
saying. The problems we had and the follow-up inspections we authorized, if this is the only thing that we
Correct.
found this time, I think they're making positive progress. Is that
Correct.
kind of the way you're feeling that?
Exactly. And yeah, I don't, I personally don't feel like that this could be more of a letter of warning, or they could have been issued a warning from the inspector, because we know that inspector is going to be going back. But for sure isn't the positive from the other issues that we had seen.
Yes, sir.
May I explain kind of from the inspector's point of view?
Please do.
Absolutely,
I mean,
please.
the inspector's been charged to go out there and do an inspection. What he saw was what he thought was a health, welfare, and safety issue. And if he took no action, or he only gave him a warning himself, then if there were a accident that caused harm to an individual, then it would look like we did not do our job. So it's totally within your purview to do what you think is right, but that's why we opened a complaint.
Yes, sir.
And he's not going to try to, to find it. I mean, he's going to follow up on what the board had asked for earlier, but when he finds this, I mean, like this became And there are photos of it, so I mean, I've seen those.
Sure, sure.
And that was his concern. It was, I mean, we all understand what renovation is. We understand, that things are going to be displaced and things. But when it's extreme and beyond that, and it could possibly cause health, welfare, and safety issues, that's why he took the action he did.
Thank you.
But I mean, it's entirely up to the board to decide what you want to do.
That helps me. Thank you.
The only other comment I have is they started this funeral establishment license in mid-2023. Is that correct?
Correct.
May, I think, March or May, I can't remember which, but March or May of
And it's
2023.
been a constant before this board. It seems like almost every month, which is a concern. That is only a comment. Are there any other questions for Mr. Bryant?
Madam Chair, I make the motion we accept council's recommendation.
There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Wheeler, a second by Mr. Naylor. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
The next complaint is complaint number,
President,
Mr. Bryant? Yes, Mr. Naylor?
I need to excuse myself
Is
one
this-
more time.
Okay. All right. Mr. Naylor will exit out of the room for our next case. And Mr. Bryant, if you would proceed.
the next complaint number is complaint number 2024-034611. Complainant stated they were invited to be a guest host of a banquet for funeral directors on June 10th, 2024, and, quote, was advised, end quote, that respondent was extremely rude to the staff of the hotel during the respondent and the staff's interactions. Complainant stated they were made aware of this information from the hotel staff and told complainant that they were instructed to not take orders from anyone other than respondent. Complainant claims they were told by staff respondent was, quote, very snide and used obscene language when interacting with them, end quote. Complainant contends this is not the first time they've heard or witnessed respondent display rude behavior, claiming that they had witnessed respondent threaten bodily harm to people complainant is associated with. Complainant did not provide any additional information regarding these recollections, stating that they, quote, cannot recount the exact date of each interaction, end quote. Respondent also listed an alleged witness without any contact information, no number or email address, other than a street address. Legal researched the database and could not find a license for this individual. Respondent replied stating that they have never met complainant and that complainant is not a member of the association nor a participant of the convention as a speaker or registered attendee. Respondent stated they were unsure who would have extended the invitation for complainant to be a speaker, as they knew through firsthand knowledge an offer to host the event was not extended to complainant, though complainant may have been invited by the host or the host's wife. Again, respondent said they had no interaction with anyone the honoree may have invited and stated that she was not present for the setup of the banquet. Respondent even recalls being late to the banquet and left as soon as it was over. Respondent refuted complainant's claim, stating that anytime she asked the hotel staff for anything, the staff was overly accommodating. Finally, respondent refuted complainant's claims that complainant frequents funeral conferences in Tennessee in order to witness these alleged other aspects of unprofessional conduct, as respondent stated that complainant is, quote, not a member, officer, speaker, or registered convention attendee, past or present, end quote. Respondent stated that they have never met complainant or their alleged witness, and that if she were guilty of the behavior complainant alleged, they would not be in the position for the convention and association that they are. Based on the above, most of complainant's allegations are based upon hearsay, as allegedly having been heard from hotel staff. The other incidents that complainant claims they witnessed, respondent threatened bodily harm. They offer no specific information or proof, stating only that they cannot recount the exact date of each interaction and offer no further information. Based on the above, we would recommend closure.
Are there any questions for Mr. Bryant?
I make a motion to approve recommendation.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Nash,
Second.
second by Mr. Lee. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Could someone please ask Mr. Naylor? Thank you, Mr. Naylor. Mr. Bryant, we could continue.
The next complaint is complaint number 2024-027701. Complainant provided a timeline of events that had transpired in 2022, including what complainant stated were fraudulent affidavits as to error notarized at respondent establishment. Complainant stated that the director of respondent establishment notarized the fraudulent affidavits that transferred assets to another family member as the sole beneficiary against the wishes of the decedent. Complainant also provides that these affidavits were prepared 2 weeks prior to the decedent's passing. Complainant further detailed the long process to challenge these issues in probate and provided an order to show that these issues had been addressed in probate court in an order signed February 28, 2024. The manager of respondent establishment replied, stating that they were fully aware of the unfortunate incident. The manager stated that neither he nor the respondent establishment had any involvement with the unethical issues that occurred in relation to complainant's claim, stating that the only involvement respondent had was carrying out funeral arrangements and providing funeral services for the decedent. The manager stated, quote, "I want to make it clear that my funeral home did not prepare any affidavits as to heirs for the decedent," end quote. The manager also denies witnessing or signing any affidavits as to heirs of the decedent, and that anything that occurred beyond the scope of the contract and the professional services rendered had no connection to the probate issues complainant has experienced. The manager further stated that whatever the director's role as a notary may have been in this instance is separate from any business that respondent establishment has served for the decedent. The manager also provided documentation referenced but not provided by a complainant that showed where the manager was allegedly a witness to the notary in the affidavit. However, the manager stated that his signature on these documents was a forgery and again reiterated that neither he nor the funeral home signed any affidavits or documentation in relation to this matter. Based on the above, while the issues detailed by complainant are very serious and an arduous task to go through after losing a loved one, complainant has not met their burden to show that respondent establishment engaged in unprofessional or unethical conduct. As a point of clarity, based on the information contained in the complaint that complainant provided, while significant evidence was provided regarding the issues through probate and the history of alleged unethical acts done by their relative, other than the alleged role as notary and witnesses to the affidavits, the staff of respondent establishment is not directly related to this matter. This is further exacerbated by the fact that the manager of respondent establishment denies ever signing for the notary or affidavits, offered the documentation to the board himself, and stated it was a forgery. Compounded by the fact that the complaint was filed against the establishment in the scope of the establishment's staff signatures, this appears to be a matter better suited for probate court, which complainant has already prevailed in, and civil court, given that the allegations are against the staff in their individual capacity, not necessarily within the confines of professional funeral directing standards. At absolute best, the board is in a position of he said, she said regarding whether the respondent's manager's signatures on these documents were a forgery. The allegations made within this complaint are far better suited for a civil court to make a determination, as the violations of unprofessional conduct, were they true, are in the individual capacity of the respondent establishment staff, not in representation of the establishment's funeral business. Based upon that, we would recommend closure with remaining issues to be determined by a court of competent jurisdiction. And I know that's a complicated one, so if you have any questions, please let me know.
Let me know if I'm going down the wrong path, but the complainant, I guess they opened or filed a complaint against the funeral establishment. And we've got a manager of the funeral establishment denying this, but do we have a licensed funeral director that supposedly committed the possible forgery of signing the manager's name and all that, or?
So I think my understanding is what they're saying happened in this timeline is that at some point prior to the decedent's passing, this relative that transferred the decedent's assets to themselves against the decedent's wishes went to this funeral establishment, handed them a document, an affidavit that says, I have no living heirs, I'm knowingly making this conveyance to this individual. And what complainant is saying is that the staff of this funeral establishment were the ones who allegedly signed as witnesses for that affidavit. And the complainant mentions, they had no knowledge of, the family, whether there were heirs, anything to that regard. So I think where the board runs into two problems. One, we do have a complaint open against the funeral establishment. And that gets tricky in that I guess the funeral establishment's arguable violation of professional conduct would be having staff members who may or may not have signed this document, negligently or not knowing the information. And then the other problem is that when we're getting into issues of their individual capacity, whether they're signing documents without knowledge, and things of that nature, and I mean, fraud being the big one, since we're bringing in forgery as a possible issue, that's something that I think is outside of the purview and jurisdiction of this board. It tiptoes into it because we've got a situation with a funeral establishment staff, but I think large in a way, of this pie that this issue makes up, 98% of it has to do with something that's better suited for civil court rather than this board.
All right, and I did read the first paragraph right, where the complainant prevailed in probate court back in February.
Correct. My understanding is that they hired an attorney. They did a great job in probate court, showed everything that they needed to do, and kind of undid some of the, I won't say undid some of the damage, but were able to get the assets back.
Okay. That clears it up for me. I appreciate that.
My question is, who was the notary? Was that a staff person with the funeral home?
My understanding is that the notary was the director is the term that the manager of the establishment used, the director of the funeral establishment. Though, again, we get into the issue of, I guess, when I was in practice, I was a notary. And if I ever stamped my name on something, it was me individually, Troy Bryant, that was on the hook, not my law firm.
Exactly.
So that's my understanding, is that the individual who was the notary on those affidavits that purportedly are fraudulent was the director of this funeral establishment.
So let me just make sure I understand. So they prevailed in probate court, got everything reversed, and then this complaint, so they're just irritated or mad at the funeral home because they did the documents. They notarized the document is what the major complaint is here?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I get it now. Okay, thank you. I make the motion we go with council's recommendation, and if the family wishes to proceed, they take it into the jurisdiction of the courts.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Wheeler, a second by Mr. Naylor. Any other discussion? I do have something. If the court, and I made a note on this, if the court does say it's fraudulent, does this case come back to the board with the funeral director being fraudulent with their unprofessional acts?
I think I will say there's not, to my knowledge, an automatic kicker to where that would happen, but let's say the complainant hears the board loud and clear, hire an attorney, they take it to civil court, and they prevail in civil court, and the judge makes a finding. Then, if the complainant wanted to come back and says, board, I have this order where the director, or I guess whoever is a licensee, where the court has an order saying that they messed up, then the board can deliberate as to whether to take action from there.
Would the complainant know from this board that if that happens, it could come back before the board?
One thing I'm happy to do to make sure that they do, I can write, we send out, whenever a complaint is closed, we send out kind of just a more general communication that here's what happened with your complaint. On certain occasions when things like this happen, I can write a custom closure letter to let them know that, essentially what we've already discussed, that if you go to civil court, get an order, and want to bring the complaint back, that's perfectly okay, just so that they're aware that that is an option.
Okay. I don't want to get into this like we did 2 months ago, but do we need to vote on what Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Naylor first and second, and then go back and add? No, we do not. Okay. So we have made a recommendation for council to make notation. So there is a motion on the floor by Mr. Wheeler, a second by Mr. Naylor. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
The next complaint is complaint number 2024-029-491. Complainant stated that they had a pre-planned funeral for her mother that had been purchased in 1987. However, complainant alleged that upon the day of the funeral, Friday, May 3rd, 2024, according to the establishment's website, the decedent was swollen and bloated. Complainant theorized that respondent had left the decedent out of a cooler and in the heat so that decomposition could occur, but provided no strict proof of this claim. Complainant further stated that respondent could not find a copy of the decedent's contract, but later did because it was, quote, found in the basement. The manager of respondent's establishment replied on respondent's behalf. The manager stated that after a thorough investigation, there were no findings of abuse of the decedent's remains. Respondent provided that the decedent came into their care on Friday, April 26, 2024 at 4:18 p.m., and the decedent was placed in their refrigerated storage within 10 minutes of her arrival. Respondent stated that the decedent's remains were only removed from refrigerated storage for embalming and preparation purposes. However, respondent did provide the date, but stated that when the decedent was removed for embalming, they discovered that the remains were showing signs of tissue gas being present. Respondent stated they utilized a specialized embalming fluid specifically for tissue gas. Respondent stated that once the process of tissue gas has begun, it is difficult to stop the damage, and the manager admitted that the decedent did appear bloated due to the presence of the tissue gas. The manager stated that they believe their embalmers took the necessary steps to reduce the effects of the tissue gas, but that they are unable to entirely stop the decomposition process. The manager stated that prior to the family's visitation, they explained to the family the bloating issue the decedent was experiencing due to tissue gas, and stated they attempted to explain this to complainant, but that complainant would not speak with them. Respondent further stated regarding being unable to find a copy of the contract that this was false. Respondent stated that complainant was not present at the arrangement conference, so they were unsure how they came to the conclusion it could not be located or was found in the basement. Respondent stated the contract is stored digitally, and the family service counselor was able to pull the digital and hard copy of the contract during their meeting with the family. Based on the above, we'd recommend a letter of caution or instruction.
Any questions for Mr. Bryant?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Bryant. Do we have a time frame from the date of Friday, the 26th at 4:18 p.m. when the decedent came into their care to what date the embalming took place?
Sorry. No, that information was not provided. We do not know specifically what date the embalming took place, but do know, I guess, the window of time we're working with is that Friday that they come in on April 26th, late in the afternoon, 4:18 p.m., to the service. I believe that's a week later. Yeah, the preceding Friday, May 3rd, 2024. So that week of time is the window we're working with, but no information was provided on exactly what day the embalming took place.
So the respondent didn't provide any information if the decedent came into their care on Friday at 4:18. Did they wait till Monday morning? Did they do it Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, day before? I guess that's my question, and I'd like to know, when did they get permission to embalm the respondent funeral home? Because that's something you have to get prior to embalming taking place.
Right. That information was not provided by respondent. If, that's certainly something I can contact respondent about following up with. I think one thing that was tricky on this from the legal side, too, is that I am by no means an expert on tissue gas, and I did kind of a cursory research on that. And it's that tricky situation of where it's kind of within the possession of the respondent, and there may be some mitigating things you can do to help with it. But I guess it gets tricky on without having definitive proof of where they, I guess, violated or made the error. And I guess to your point, if we're able to establish a more definitive timeline, that could be helpful. But I guess at the end of the day, it can still get tricky to say what is their liability in terms of if there was a mistake, was it just a bad bout of tissue gas? And some of that is my gap in knowledge of how that looks in the industry.
So I guess my question is, for those of us that are embalmers, when you embalm, there's reasons why we do it. One is to prevent. So any length of time from the death to the time the embalming takes place, and we all deal with medical examiner's office where someone dies today and they're not released into our care until Friday. So the time has elapsed, and there's certain things you need to do because the deceased has already had several days since they passed. So I guess my question is to the funeral home, what did you do? When did it take place? When did you get permission? And why was there a delay? If you received permission, like when someone dies, where I work, they die today, we're in touch with the family today. They want embalming, it's done today. There is no delay. And I guess there's my question. When did they get permission to embalm? And when was the embalming? When did it take place? And if there is a gap, why was there a gap in time?
And I'm just double checking to make sure that information is not already in here. Just 1 second.
It's not. That's why.
I have a question. It says here that they had a prearrangement. Oh, do you have a copy of that prearrangement? Was embalming called for in the prearrangement?
We do not have a copy of that contract. That was not included by complainant or the respondent. And that information is not in the complaint or the response.
So I guess my question, Mr. Bryan, is, so the family, are they questioning the standard of care?
Yes, I will say the complainant seemed to have the theory that they mentioned several times in the complaint that some staff member had commented that because of the age of the pre-need agreement that they were getting a good deal or something to that effect. So complainant seemed to have the theory that because they were purportedly the establishment was losing money, that they didn't put the care needed into it, and which obviously is a big allegation. But so that seemed to be the angle. I guess the overarching qualm was the decedent given the proper standard of care, but it was kind of with that specific, I guess, point of the complainant's theory as to why a standard of care was not offered.
So I would like to make a motion, and it's open for discussion, of course, with the other board members, that we go back. I would like to see the prearrangement agreement with what was paid for, and I'd like the funeral home to respond on Friday when the decedent came into their care. When did they speak to the family? When embalming took place, and did they get verbal permission, which is usually what we get over the phone, and then when the family makes arrangements, they sign it. So I just got a lot of questions. If the person died on Friday and then the family didn't come in till Monday, did the funeral home wait till Monday? And to me, there is a lack of standard of care with that.
So from the 26th until the 3rd, there's 30 days in a week. Okay. So there is a motion on the floor by Mr. Wheeler for legal to do more extensive information, fact-finding, to go back to the pre-need to find out the death occurred on Friday, or no, we don't have a death date because it came to the funeral home on Friday, Friday, April 26th. So we don't have a date of death. want to know if, I'm trying to repeat your motion, and you want to know if they spoke to the family and got embalming authorization. So we need a date of death, date of embalming, and when they spoke to the family,
Pre-need contract.
and to look at the pre-need contract. That is the motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Haynes. Any other discussion?
The only thing I would add, I agree with everything that Mr. Wheeler said, that anybody who's a licensed embalmer knows that regardless of when you receive a decedent that has tissue gas, that those things can change rapidly. And sometimes it can be stopped, sometimes it can't. Sometimes it gets progressively worse even after embalming. So I don't, that the question, answers to those questions would maybe help make a determination. Also, I think that maybe if they did an embalming report, we could know what their standard of care was to try to prevent or eliminate that tissue gas issue.
It's a good point, Mr. Nash. The other thing I'd like to add is I hope this sends a message back to the family that before we make a recommendation, we need to have all facts that are related to this complaint. So there's a motion?
I got one more thing,
Yeah,
so I'm
sure.
sorry.
Sure.
One thing that the respondent put in here was that the complainant was not present at the arrangement conference. And then the respondent had tried to reach out to talk to the complainant, but they would not speak to them. So it seems that they tried to talk to them about the situation. And I realize emotions are high and it can be frustrating, but I do see where it does say in there where they tried to speak with him about it. So I guess the other question would be who, if the respondent, or the complainant wasn't at the arrangement conference, who was responsible for the arrangements? And this is their mother, correct? Yeah.
Correct, yes.
So,
Mr. Bryant, do you have all of the information that we have added to this motion?
I do, yes.
Madam President.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Brown, also, we got, in the respondents, he stated that it came in on April 26th, but it was placed in refrigeration as well. And so, want to know how long the remains was in the refrigerator. It was in the refrigerator. Okay.
Before embalming.
Before embalming.
Yeah.
Because tissue gas is it's a mean thing, and so it was just placed in there,
Sure.
and one checked on it, to see if we can find that out.
Sure.
What kind of cooler?
and I'll add this too, that if the decedent comes in, staff places the decedent in a cooler, they get permission, let's say they embalm that person later that day or the next day or whatever it is, without physically looking at them, there's really no way to know if they had tissue gas at that time. And if the removal staff or the transfer person may not have been a licensed funeral director that could have been able to tell those things have happened. So there's a lot of variables here to consider, I think, and I think that what Madam President said just a minute ago is that the complainant knows that we just need, those are the things we need to know.
Again, there's a motion on the floor by Mr. Wheeler, second by Mr. Haynes. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Bryant, thank you for notating all of our comments, and to the board, thank you for your discussion. Mr. Bryant, if you would re-present our next case.
Yes, our last one is a representation from the June meeting. It is complaint number 2024-027121. This matter was previously presented to the board at its June 11th, 2024 meeting as follows. Complainant, wife of the deceased, stated that they met with the funeral director at Respondent Establishment on March 16th, 2024, with arrangements finalized March 18th, 2024, with payment made in full. Complainant contends that a private visitation was scheduled for March 21, 2024. Complainant claims that those who were invited to this visitation stated that the decedent was not in a casket and was instead on a metal table with his head propped up by a block of styrofoam. Complainant further contended that the attendees claimed they were only allowed to visit for 10 to 15 minutes, when complainant says it was discussed they would be able to visit for 2 hours. Complainant stated on April 5th, 2024, respondent was 30 minutes late with the decedent's remains to the graveside service. Finally, complainant alleged that she had ordered a poster board with the decedent's photographs but had never received it. Respondent replied, stating that prior to receiving the decedent on March 16, 2024, they spoke to complainant to determine what services would be provided. Respondent stated that complainant advised she wanted a formal viewing with a graveside service to follow. On March 19, 2024, one day after the arrangement conference, respondent advised that complainant had issues gathering finances to handle the cost of services. In response to these financial issues, complainant agreed to have an informal viewing with a select few family members. Respondent explained that in an informal viewing, the decedent is not placed in a casket because an informal viewing contemplates not having finances available to purchase a casket. That is, an informal viewing is an option when the family cannot afford a casket. Respondent advised that the decedent is placed on a dressing table and placed into an area for limited family to view. Respondent stated the family is given 2 hours during this informal visitation. Respondent stated that complainant had come to view the decedent separately on March 21st, 2024, stayed for approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and left, stating that other family members would come in later that day. Respondent stated that at that time, while viewing the decedent, complainant never mentioned anything about dissatisfaction with the decedent, never mentioned anything about the decedent not being casketed, and that later, no family members ever asked why the decedent was not casketed during the informal viewing. On April 5th, 2024, the date of the graveside service, respondent stated the cemetery was packed with vehicles for the graveside service of the decedent, which, as respondent explains, caused the staff to have issues entering the cemetery for service. Respondent stated that the policy of the cemetery is to not allow additional traffic into the cemetery until you are able to enter safely. Respondent stated that this is why their staff was late and that the employee of respondent establishment had been 5 to 10 minutes late due to cemetery traffic. Again, respondent stated that neither the family nor anyone in attendance contacted respondent to let them know that anyone was late until receiving the complaint. Finally, respondent stated that the poster board was ordered by complainant, was not ordered in time, so a refund was issued to the family. Respondent stated that this refund was sent out on May 5th and that an additional refund of $995 is also being refunded to the family for the cost of the rental casket. The sister of the complainant submitted additional information responding to respondent's reply. The sister stated she was present for the arrangement conference, and while the complainant did indicate during that meeting that she was low on finances, family members, including the sister, offered to help pay for the services. The sister stated that complainant provided the manager a check on March 18th for the full amount requested. However, the sister stated that due to the overwhelming situation of losing a loved one and the context of the decedent's death, complainant asked the sister to cancel the viewing and to ask if it was possible to have a private viewing for the decedent's grandmother and mother. The sister stated she called the respondent and informed them of the change, to which he explained he had already ordered the casket and had begun embalming the deceased. The sister stated she told the manager that they knew this was a last-minute change, and because of that, they would not be seeking a refund. The sister stated the manager advised that they could allow a private viewing on March 22nd. However, the sister stated that the manager did not inform them that the decedent would not be casketed for this private viewing, and due to the nature of their conversation, the casket had already been ordered, believed he already had a casket available. The sister closed her rebuttal by stating that their aunt contacted the funeral home 15 minutes after the remains were scheduled to arrive at the cemetery, and that it was another 20 minutes before a representative arrived, totaling to over 30 minutes late. At that time, legal's recommendation was, based on the above, there appears to be a discrepancy in communication and understanding on behalf of the manager of respondent establishment and complainant and her family. Based on the evidence presented, it appears they were prepared to do a traditional viewing, which included a casket, and that payment was received. However, soon after, complainant asked if they could transition to a private viewing. As respondent recollects, they had discussed a private viewing during the arrangement conference, which respondent stated is ordinarily done to save money on the casket rental. It is unclear whether the conversation between complainant's sister and respondent's manager, whether it was communicated that the change from a public viewing to a private one, that is, a viewing with a rental casket and a viewing without, was for financial reasons or emotional reasons. While we know why the change was requested based on the sister's response, it is unclear whether respondent knew why the change was being requested. As such, it appears that consistent with their prior explanation of what a private viewing entailed, no casketing, the manager of respondent establishment canceled the casket order and processed the refund for the casket to the family, which appears to be consistent with what the family was envisioning, a private viewing but with casketing. Both parties agree that a representative of respondent was late with the decedent's cremains, but differ in the amounts: 5 to 10 minutes from respondent, 35 from complainant's sister. It was a recommendation of $500 civil penalty. The board asked that it be represented to determine whether a new statement of funeral goods and services was created to reflect the new contract. So, legal spoke to respondent and inquired as to whether a new contract or statement of funeral goods and services was created to reflect the change, going from a casket and formal visitation to no casket and private visitation. Respondent stated that a new contract was not drafted because he received the call to forego the casket the day of the visitation. Respondent stated ordinarily they have a policy that everything must be paid 48 hours prior to the visitation. But since the family had difficulty raising the finances at their request, he allowed them to pay the day of the visitation. However, the day of the visitation, complainant called and requested that they do an informal visitation and not use the casket. Respondent stated that at this time, the decedent had already been casketed, but at the request of the complainant, they removed the decedent from the casket and sent it back at a financial loss that was not passed on to the family. Respondent added that the wife of the decedent did not come to the informal visitation as there was friction between the family. Thus, even if a new contract had been drafted, it could not have been signed by a complainant in time for the visitation to occur. Again, respondent confirmed that a new contract statement of funeral goods and services had not been drafted as the change occurred the day the visitation was scheduled to take place. One thing I will note that I guess we do have our direct answer on the question that Mr. Wheeler asked about the statement of funeral goods and services. The waters are a little more muddied in regard to whether payment was actually received or not, as we seem to have a lot of different versions of how that went. So I'm sure there are questions after that one.
I mean, I've seen to where back in the beginning, everything was paid for. He was casketed. Then we go to, they wanted to reduce it to an informal visitation. So that's where the question arose, did they take off that with the original contract? So when they changed to a private visitation, they removed him from the casket.
Correct.
Put him on a table. And they said they actually sent the casket back.
That is what respondent said, yes.
Sent it back where?
So I think this is my ignorance of the industry. I guess are there places that supply caskets to establishments that don't have them available, or what does that look like? Because from my end, I'm lost on that.
Mr. Bryant, I think what we're looking at is a rental casket with an insert inside of it. And that insert can be not reused, but it can be destroyed after a body has been placed into it. Am I correct, funeral directors? Okay. So the question that I have is they went from a formal viewing to an informal viewing, took their loved one out of the insert, put him on a table, which is more trouble, when they could have gone ahead, left him in the rental casket out of, I would say, professional ethics. And then, since it was informal and only a few people there, then take care of the insert the way that it's properly to be disposed of. Usually cremation with the body in it. It's very confusing because the taking out of the insert or the casket, it says rental casket, so we here all are under the understanding it's an insert. Am I speaking for everybody or what?
Yes.
Yes, and it doesn't say that they, again, this is,
But they've already paid everything.
right, so, and it doesn't say in here where they asked him to not to do that, them to do that, the manager or the respondent.
And I guess that's I'll agree with that, is no time did the family ever tell the funeral director, remove him from the rental casket. To go from a private or a public to a private viewing does not indicate that you're to remove. I mean, the deceased is still to be viewed, and so, and everything was paid for in full.
I think, oh, I'm sorry.
We have an original contract back the first time that we were able to look at to see what they paid for.
Yes, one second, I can pull it up.
Yeah, they didn't go back and do a new contract.
From the original statement of funeral goods and services, it appears it was a steel casket, which is unusual, I would assume, but a 20-gauge steel, but a rental casket. It says Apollo, A-P-O-L-L-O is what it says, Apollo
Well,
rental.
so they,
Hyphen 20-gauge steel, and there's a price of $995 on it.
so I, there were some manufacturers at one point that were making a metal rental casket, but an Apollo is not. That's a Batesville product.
It's a Batesville product.
Yeah.
And one thing to probably not answer Mr. Wheeler's earlier question / comment of, I think when reading through everything on the initial presentation and then refamiliarizing myself with everything, what I think was discussed in that initial arrangement meeting was, okay, we have our typical visitation, we put your loved one in a casket and just do it that way. Or if you're low on finances, we can do a private viewing with just a rental casket and, or sorry, I'm confusing things more. Without a casket, you save money because you don't have to pay for the rental casket. And so my understanding was that that's what the family went with. Then on the day of, as the sister of the complainant says, because the complainant was feeling a little overwhelmed with everything, just said, I don't want a big visitation. Let's just do the private informal one. And so this is further compounded by whether it was paid in full earlier or not. But I think from respondents' interpretation, that was they haven't come up with the money. They're struggling to raise the finances. So that's why they don't want the visitation. They want the informal so they can save money on the casket. Which I know is confusing. But.
Okay, let me get this clear. So the family came in, made arrangements for this 20 gauge. Is that what you said, Mr. Gribble? 20 gauge. They didn't have the funds for a formal viewing, so they take their loved one out of the casket, put her on a table. Then they go back after that informal viewing, place the body back into the casket, and then bury the casket. The whole time I've been thinking it's a cremation.
Yeah, that's
So that's so it reads at first it reads as I'm going to call traditional cremation, but now with that, does it on that statement of goods and services, does it say anything about crematory fee or anything like that, or does it say anything about opening and closing or an outer container or anything like that? I'm very confused. Yeah.
my understanding, and we're double checking this to make sure because I don't want to tell you all the wrong thing, but my understanding is that it was a traditional cremation, that the intent and purpose was to have the rental casket for the visitation purpose. And then when the respondent gets the call, as they say, the day of, that we don't want to do that, then he says, okay, we won't use the casket, I'll send it back. But that it was the rental casket was for the purpose strictly of the visitation is my understanding, but we'll definitely concede the waters are murky here.
They'd already found up the insert. So what they cremating?
I don't, it doesn't have
I
any.
agree there, but, so they're just in and out.
Looking at the statement of funeral goods and services, there's a charge of $800 for embalming, a charge of $750 for direct cremation with their funeral home's alternative container, a charge of $350 for visitation/viewing conducted at their funeral home, and they have a total of $1,900 there. Then they've added $995 for this rental casket.
That's even weird, because when you have a rental casket, now, I don't guess you have to, but when they use our rental casket, the insert's included in that. So it's almost like they took them out of a regular casket and then put them in a cremation tray. They've double charged, or charged for that as well.
Then they do a total in column A of $28.95, and then they go over to column B and have a Tennessee cremation permit fee of $25. It's very hard to read this. It looks like it says it's OR board, BOARD, and it's a $100 charge. Does that make any? Could be QR. Looks like it's OR board, $100.
That may have been the poster board that the, yeah,
Okay.
that,
And then book markers, 100 copies, $151, sales tax $92.04, which everything totaled $3263.04. It's on the statement of funeral goods and services.
But they never went back and corrected and took the visitation off and all that. We do not have an updated statement of goods and services.
that is the, I feel like, one definitive answer I have for all of you today is that when the respondent said, I got the call the day of, the complainant did not come to the informal visitation even to sign a new one, did not make a new statement of goods and funeral goods and services to reflect the new agreement.
And that is the funeral director's responsibility. That falls solely on the funeral director. The other thing I want to bring up, it says respondent stated that the policy, the cemetery, does not allow additional traffic. Did he include the copy of the policy? If not, it's hearsay.
Yeah, he did not.
So without the board seeing the policy that this is what the cemetery says, we can't go with what he says.
And I think that was the kind of the differing timelines of, because again, respondent admits that they were late. They said it was 10 to 15 minutes, and then the complainant's sister said it was a little closer to 30, 35. So I guess I did not include a recommendation because I knew there would be discussion on this one, but based on kind of where we are on what we know for certain, I would recommend that $500 civil penalty that we discussed before, and I think that contemplates kind of the murky waters that we have at play here, but the know for certain did not make a new statement of funeral goods and services. Know for certain they were late to the cemetery. And I think cumulatively the board has justification on what we know that $500 reflects that.
Yeah, because the respondent says, money was an issue, but on March 18th, they paid the full amount, and the burial didn't take place till April 5th. I mean, if I do my math, there's about 3 weeks involved there that the funeral director should have been in touch with the family about something.
I agree, and just one final small question. There's no problem, as far as the family's concerned, about overpayment or anything like that. There's nothing we need to worry about on that end.
Correct. Even to the point that the sister of the complainant said when they, because I mean, sister admits too, they switched gears on the funeral establishment kind of last minute. She even said, we're not requesting a refund. We know what we're moving to is cheaper. So we're good on the financials front to the family.
That's kind of what counts for me, so thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the council recommendation and
Second.
authorize a hearing.
There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Nash and a second by Mr. Wheeler. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This motion carries with legal's recommendation of a $500 civil penalty. So that concludes our legal report. Mr. Bryant, as always, we're so glad you bring a bottle of water for giving our reports. We'll move on our agenda, and next we have Mr. Gribble, if you would give us your director's report, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Board members, good morning. These are a report of licenses administratively approved by the Executive Director pursuant to Board authority for the period of June 7, 2024 through August 2, 2024. Not too many this time. Typically, there are more than this, but there's not many this time. Closed establishments for this meeting. There are 2 establishments that were reported closing since the last board meeting. That's Hatch and Fleming's Funeral Home, 314 Donaldson Pike in Nashville, and Baxter Funeral Home at 228 3rd Avenue South in Baxter. The disciplinary action report is a report of consent orders that have been administratively accepted, approved by the Executive Director pursuant to Board authority, and as reported on the May 2024 and June 2024 Regulatory Board disciplinary action reports. So you have a list of the respondents and the violations and the civil penalties for that. And the complaint report for this board meeting, we have at this point, 31 complaints open against either funeral directors and or embalmers, and 27 against establishments, for a total of 58. That is my report. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Make a motion to accept the executive director's report.
Second.
Have a motion on the floor by Mr. Lee in several seconds, so I'm going to say Mr. Naylor since he's sitting right beside me. Any other discussion regarding Mr. Gribble's report? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Gribble. Your report has been, the motion carried.
Can I ask one question before we move on? Like a while ago when we were in the complaints and, we were talking about the storage, the issue, how bad it looked. Where's the line as far as what we can see in the complaints or the investigations that would kind of let us see what the investigator saw, or you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes. So I think that line is a little blurry just in the sense of it goes as far as what the board can look at without identifying information being given. I will say I double checked in that one in particular to keep it with the file and in case it goes forward to a hearing. The pictures were stamped with the establishment, their license number, all of that. So, and I guess the example of this one here, those pictures couldn't have been shown because if you all had seen that, you would have known exactly who the respondent was and who we were talking about. But if there is a need in the future, I guess information from things like that can be shown so long as you all can look at it without seeing it, which gets tricky because, I don't think you could know right off the bat which establishment it was by looking at the back of their establishment.
Yeah.
But, I guess it gets tricky to kind of walk that line. So I think usually, as is frustratingly the case with lawyers, is that we prefer to be way safer than is probably necessary. But if there's an opportunity in the future where we can walk that line, then we'll definitely try and provide whatever information we can.
At this time, we will move to do we want to, Mr. Gribble, the individual licensing or the establishment?
The individual, if that's okay with the
Sure.
board.
The individual licensing,
Madam President,
yes.
I need to recuse myself from this individual license.
At this time, Mr. Nash will will recuse himself and step outside the door. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Charles Ramos. I'm from Rutherford County, Tennessee, and I currently work at Woodlawn
Okay.
Funeral Home.
Okay. You have applied, and we have several different documents regarding your application. I'm going to open the floor for questions.
I'm Mr. Lee.
Yes, sir.
Pleasure to meet you. Without getting into all the details, I see all the honesty and everything on the application. Am I correct in saying roughly 15 years since anything
Yes, sir.
has occurred?
Hadn't been no contact with law enforcement. I didn't even speeding ticket over 15 years.
Are you having any, luck or anything as far as the expungement that you were hoping for?
Well, my attorney, Peter Striance, he's working on filing motions on all the charges when I was younger to get expunged, so that's going to take a little time. We have to go back in front of the judge and district attorney.
I understand. And so far, as of today, there's nothing else outstanding, no future court dates,
No, sir.
unpaid fines, anything like that?
No, sir.
Okay. I want to ask it as in general without putting everything out there, so.
Yes, sir.
And one question, if maybe you can explain, and I read the rebuttal, as far as with the conference and the testing that day, I think, where they filed a complaint or didn't validate your test, a violation during the testing?
Yes, I know what that was about.
Okay.
So we got a Quizlet online where you can study, and everybody helps everybody put material on there to study for the national board. I made a mistake of sharing the individuals onto mine instead of going back and forth. So they seen it, and I didn't know, and they told me that they'd seen questions that could be possibly board questions. And they made me write a statement, told me to delete it off of Quizlet, and they get back with me whether I'll be suspended for a year from taking the exam or not. But I was being honest, I didn't have no knowledge. So I deleted it, wrote a letter. They got back with me and gave me another chance. Well, I don't feel like I did nothing wrong, but they didn't suspend me or nothing from taking the exam.
Have you taken the board exam again?
Yes, ma'am.
You did?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And you passed it?
Correct.
Okay. The national board?
At first, it was a state, and then in 2023, they took the state exam and told me I had to take it on a national level, which I took both and passed, and the state board exam also, as far
Passed.
as the law.
Passed the funeral directing and embalming in October, November of '23, and then
Ye-
the law in May?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you've had a full-time job with your firm now for how long?
Going on 15 months.
Okay. So you've met all the requirements, and just due to that section of your application, you're asking for the board's blessing to go ahead and get your license. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What do you do at Woodlawn?
I work in the care center. I do removals, I dress and casket deceased, and just whatever
Okay.
they need me to do.
I have a couple more questions. In your letters, you said, your change of ways. And Lord, we all know that, some people go down the wrong path sometimes and they rebound from that. And we're very proud of you for doing that. But you want to be a funeral director because you want to help people.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you wanted to help people, why did you go into funeral directing and not into reorganizing or helping students that may have gone down that wrong path and taken a different path?
Well,
Because,
I
go ahead.
currently, right now, I got friends, like police officers that I went to school with.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes I ask them if I could go and talk to younger, because at that time, my parents would drill in my head, be careful with certain individuals, and I didn't, at that time, I wasn't.
That's a mama thing.
Yes, ma'am. So I do talk to certain individuals about, even, because I remember back when I was young, they would bring people to my high school, Beach High School in Hendersonville, from jails, and I remember the students at the time, they used to laugh and not pay no mind, but it's serious.
Yes, sir.
As the generation, you know, the newer generation comes, the older people try to tell them, and they don't want to listen. Or some do, but small percentage.
In addition to helping people, why did you want to be a funeral director?
Well, one of my friends, when I was in my 20s, Donnie Ayers, Ellen Jennings and Ayers,
Yeah.
we hung out a lot when I was younger. And he used to live at the funeral home. We saw go to the funeral home before we went out. And I used to ask him questions about it. I was interested, and I took a liking to it. And he asked his father if I could come in and witness an embalming, a service and stuff, and I took a liking to it.
Oh, good.
And that's when he told me about John A. Gupton. I didn't know there was a mortuary school in Nashville, and he had the number
Yeah.
memorized and gave me all the information.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you also are going to be an embalmer, correct? Mr.
Yes.
Reynolds?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just a little bit about, when did you begin the process of trying to do expungement of these charges?
We just now started, probably like 6 months ago.
Did you
Like,
know prior to 6 months ago that this would need to be cleared up? Is something that the board might look at in getting a license?
Yes, because when I talked to Mr. Gribble, when I got my apprenticeship license, I had to submit all the paperwork back then. At that time, I didn't say nothing about expungement. I wouldn't, but he basically told me, don't get no more trouble between the time I talk to you now to the time you got to come from the board.
Or even after?
Yeah, correct.
I guess my question is, what does your attorney say on a timeline? And the only reason, I worked in the court system in Knox County for about 16 years, so I'm pretty familiar with how expungements work. And since it's been a 15-year period since the last one, some of these should move pretty quickly.
Yeah, because on each charge was probation. I never went to prison or nothing like that. It was just
And you
probation.
abided by your probation?
Yes, sir, I
As
did.
instructed by the court?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay.
And he didn't give me time. He said some of the stuff could drag out, filing motions, talking to the district attorney, and getting me in front of the judge. And basically, it's up to the DA as far as expungement. And then it goes in front of the judge for him to grant it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the judge has total say-so on
Yes,
the
sir.
expungement. Okay.
Did you leave John A. Gupton in good terms?
I believe so. Mr. Spann, the whole staff, especially Mr. Spann, he was awesome. And he accommodated me with my disability, right to my exams. It was read to me and stuff, and they were all awesome there.
Good. And you served your apprenticeship under Mr. Murphy,
Yes, ma'am, in Music City.
the full time?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Naylor. Do I hear a second?
Second.
One thing I'd like to add, Madam Chair, if possible, once the expungements are granted or through the courts, can Mr. Ramos please get a copy to the state? Mr. Gribble, so that he knows these have been expunged from the court's records.
Mr.
First, I just want to clarify, what was Mr. Naylor's motion that was on the floor that had been?
To accept him to get his license.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I think, so I don't know the answer to your question specifically.
I'm gonna quit asking questions.
Well, I feel like I'm letting Mr. Wheeler down today. He's had a lot I haven't had the answer to, but I do think as far as for Mr. Ramos's movement forward and rehabilitation on that, if that's something he chooses to provide to us, I think that would be fantastic. But I don't know that it's something that can be contingent, so to speak.
I guess my question is, he's come before the board, this was an issue about his license evidently, correct? Are these charges? So I think just to clear them up, once the expungements are done, would just satisfy the board's actions, I guess, on the approval of the licensing. At his, once they're granted.
Right.
It just so goodwill to the board.
No, of course, and totally understand that. I guess it would just be difficult so hypothetically, if Mr. Ramos does get expunged but fails to send it in, or if Mr. Ramos doesn't get expunged, then I guess it would, I think it's just, and I understand your question isn't necessarily making it contingent on it, but I think as far as the board can make it very clear to Mr. Ramos that they would love to see that, but I don't think it's something that we can physically hold him to do that. If you fail to do it, there's some consequence or anything to that regard, unfortunately.
You weren't, I may have misheard that. You weren't making that a requirement as far as getting the license, just
No,
as far as goodwill that, hey, I went even a step further to get expungement?
Well, we've taken his time to come before the board about this. So I think, with the board, if we've made Mr. Ramos come and spend his morning here with us and listen to us, I think that, it would be nice, just goodwill to the board, showing that he is doing what needs to be done. I have no problems, with him getting his license or anything like that, but he has been brought before us about this. So I think it's just, I guess it's just tidying up housekeeping, I would call it. It would be nice to have it and that it was taken care of.
Sure, and I think asking in that regard is fair. It would be nice to have it once you get it expunged. Please send it in. We'd love to know that they got taken care of for you, and so we can be happy and excited for you. I think that's all fair, but I just wanted to clarify for my own end of that it's not a requirement, which it seems like that's not what you're asking, or if you don't do this, then this will happen. Just as we'd love to see it when that happens. I think that's fair.
Before I call for go ahead.
I've got a
Mr.
question.
Ramos, yes.
I understand about the expungements. I know my lawyer told me on 2 of the misdemeanors, which was reduced to reckless driving, because it was the DUI. He said it may be expunged, but may not, just because. And my question, what if I can't get that?
Don't worry about it. It should be able to be.
Okay,
In
but
my
he.
experience in 16 years with the court system.
Okay, I'll just. That's
It
what
just
he
might
told.
take some time.
Okay, yeah.
The expungements will not affect
Your
you getting your license.
Yes,
We're
sir.
voting on that now. If you elect, when you do get them expunged,
Yes, sir.
to send a copy in for your file,
Yes, sir.
Great.
I'll be. Yes.
Before I call for the vote, is there any other discussion? I would just like to say that that all boards, and I can speak for this current board, is very thorough. This is not an attack to you. It's just making sure that we have all the answers that we needed. We are requesting that you go out and you serve families and provide good work ethics, and don't come before this board again,
Yes,
okay?
ma'am. I don't want to. Yeah.
So the motion on the floor is Mr. Naylor and a second by Mr. Lee. No other further discussion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Congratulations, Mr. Ramos.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you. Could someone ask Mr. Nash to return to the meeting? This time we will hear from an establishment, approval for an establishment license. And if you all could approach, please. And I don't want to mess this up, so I'm going to ask you to pronounce the name of the funeral service.
Yes, ma'am. La Paloma Funeral Services.
Very good. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your request?
Yes, ma'am. So my name is Esperanza King. I'm a native Memphian, and I've been working in the funeral industry for the last 10 years. I received my funeral director certificate from Gupton College here in Nashville, and I come before you today to seek your approval for my application for La Paloma Funeral Services in Memphis. La Paloma translates to the dove in Spanish. The dove symbolizes peace, hope, and the journey of the soul. In many cultures, the dove represents the spirit's ascent to the afterlife, offering comfort and a sense of serenity during a time of loss. Naming the funeral home La Paloma reflects my commitment to providing a peaceful and respectful farewell for loved ones, ensuring they are honored with dignity they deserve as they make their final journey home. I am of Mexican and African American heritage, and with these backgrounds, I've provided numerous services to the community in Memphis. Over the years, I realized that the Spanish-speaking community was underserved, typically due to a language barrier and unfamiliarity with the culture. Memphis is home to almost 80,000 Latinos coming from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Venezuela, and many other countries, and including in the areas surrounding Mississippi, Arkansas, and the outskirts of Memphis. Therefore, I wanted to venture and open our La Paloma Funeral Home by providing funeral services directly to the Spanish-speaking community. I am bilingual and likely one of a few select bilingual funeral directors in the state. I can speak directly with the families without the need for a translator, and I can explain everything in their language, as well as communicating with funeral directors in Latin America and other countries that speak Spanish. La Paloma will be a family-run funeral service provider committed to ensuring our Hispanic community is well taken care of, including expeditious international shipping of human remains and cremated remains. Over the last 10 years, I have assisted funeral homes in preparing paperwork, translation, and consular processing for the shipment of human remains internationally, and I take great pride in ensuring families that I can do this expeditiously. The application before you outlines our intentions to have a small funeral arrangement area and funeral home, and I look forward to any questions that you might have about the space.
Any questions?
Will you be doing services there?
We will not be doing services there. We will not be having bodies present there. We will only be doing arrangements there.
Arrangements? And so where would your services be?
I'm working in conjunction with a couple of Spanish-speaking churches in the area. As you're familiar with the area where I am, there's a heavy Hispanic presence there, and so we have a couple of churches that have offered their spaces for small and larger services.
Legal, I'm assuming that the reason this is before us personally is because, they're before us today is because of the storefront and not standalone. Is that for our final approval on it?
That is correct, yes.
Is the folks that are doing your embalming, this is Afterlife, is it a licensed funeral establishment in Tennessee, or is it just a name of a company?
It's a licensed funeral establishment and embalming.
I see Dana Taylor's Embalmers license.
Yes.
But I don't see the establishment license for that. Which is,
It's a licensed establishment. I think it's Afterlife Mortuary, if I recall
Mortuary.
correctly.
is
the
that,
name
and
of
so
it.
they will take care of your embalming and like dressing, casketing, all those things will take place at their facility?
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Gribble, with being a storefront, is she required to supply us with where she'll be having services at?
I think that's the board's discretion, or legal to determine whether it's necessary or not. Some people in the past have submitted letters from churches.
Yes.
Is there anything in the rules or regulations that would require it?
Off the top of my head, I do not believe so, but let me double check. I can pull those up in just a second.
In the meantime, I'm going to ask you, where have you previously worked? What funeral homes?
Serenity Funeral Home was where I spent a majority of my time.
Serenity. Okay. And would you, and this is just because I don't know this process, okay? So when you advertise for your funeral home, how would the general public know before coming to you that you do not have a facility to have services in a funeral home? How will they know?
How will they know before they come? I think, the funeral industry is kind of a repeat business. I think once they come in and they see the facility that I don't have a space, I will offer them a space if they don't have a church home to go to. But I think it would be something that they would eventually know. I don't know if I would advertise that specifically, that I don't have a visitation room on premise. We are La Paloma Funeral Services, so it doesn't necessarily make it seem like it's a funeral home.
So if I were to call in and ask that you take care of my loved ones' services, and I don't want a funeral, I want cremation, but I want to be able to see my loved one, what would be your response?
My initial response would be, well, there's a couple of options as far as viewing. Is this for liability purposes as far as just an identification or for public viewing?
I want to see my loved one and make sure she's in your care.
Okay. So there's two options. One option would be a witnessing of the cremation prior at the crematory, which the crematory does allow. But if they would like to see them not in the confines of the crematory, but privately, we've made arrangements with Dana and also another funeral home that will offer us a small viewing room. I have a photo on my iPad of the viewing room. So we would schedule a time. It was not submitted as part of the application, but I do have a photo from Dana's location. And it's just like a small viewing room, and the body would be here. And so we would just schedule a time. I would go with them to Dana's location and have them view. Ideally, I would do it if it's going to be a cremation, in conjunction with the date that we'll probably take the body to the crematory so that we can take out that day and then transfer it to the crematory quickly.
How long has Dana's funeral establishment been?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but she's been in
very
business
recent.
a few years.
Several years.
Several years.
Okay.
Several years. And I worked with her when she was at NJ Ford, so I've known Dana a number of years.
So I have a question for you. I come from a funeral home in East Tennessee where we do a lot of Hispanic Latino services, and we're shipping to Honduras and Guatemala and all. Most of mine are Roman Catholics. We do a traditional. So where will you put, if you have a family that does a traditional, where will they be held?
So we're actually across the street from a Catholic church, La Resurrección, or?
No, I'm asking before services, once the deceased is dressed and in a casket, where will they be kept prior to the services and the rosary taking place or any other services?
They would be at Dana's location up until services. Does that?
So they would never come into your facility
Correct.
at all?
No, we would not have bodies at our facility.
Okay, so let me ask this. Is Dana willing to take the liability if that building catches on fire and burns to the ground and you have two deceased people there? Who's liable for damage?
They would be in her care. So she's performing the embalming and dressing, and so they're in her care up until that time, so I would.
Until funeral service time. And she understands she takes that liability.
Yes.
of anything that might take place prior to the deceased being moved to a facility for a funeral service.
I can discuss it with her, but yes, that's our understanding.
I think that's something that needs to be clarified just because of the legal aspects of you not holding those human remains in your care, that they're in somebody else's.
And your purpose for starting this funeral service, because we can't call it a funeral home, it's funeral services, is to more or less serve the Latino and Hispanic community.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bryant?
Thank you, Ms. Naylor. Yeah, after looking over your earlier question, there's nothing in there specifically about a requirement for, store-based. There's nothing in statute or rule that would apply to that directly.
Madam President, I move that we accept her application for funerals, for
La Paloma.
La Paloma funeral services.
Or La Paloma,
Okay.
if you want to say it like that.
She can say it in Memphis, too.
I'm going to give you a second in just a second. Just for me, I've noticed toward the end, who is it Santrell Ellis? Is
she's-
that your partner or
She's-
family or
She's a partner just for the LLC.
for the LLC, not licensed or won't be helping her? Just, okay.
We have a motion. We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Naylor,
And a second by me.
second by Mr. Lee. Any discussion?
I've got one more question. I
Yeah, sure.
apologize. What Mr. Wheeler was asking you about afterlife, holding the decedents there, is that something they do for other businesses that are similar to what yours will be?
I think so. I can't speak for them,
It's
but
primarily like a mortuary service? Okay.
yes, sir.
Correct.
All right.
They do quite a bit of
Just want to make
business
sure I
down
understood
there.
that. I understand. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, discussion? There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Naylor, second by Mr. Lee. I want to make one comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I am from a funeral home that has bricks and mortar, and understanding your concept is new to a lot of us. We just hope that you understand that being with having this funeral establishment license, there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. So at this time, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank
Congratulations.
you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, we have some new business. Mr. Bryant.
Okay, so just wanted to give you all an update on the rulemaking, if you all remember the red line document from our June meeting. So anytime, even though you all gave approval to go ahead and set that rulemaking hearing, anytime there is language change or altered, just out of an abundance of caution, we want to bring it back, get approval again, because again, the worst case scenario is for us to go through all 20 some odd steps of rulemaking, get to the very end, and then you all not be in favor of it. So we'd much rather be safer than sorry on that. So the update on the red line document that you should have there on your iPads, a couple of updates, more so in what is not there as opposed to what is there. Just want to take a second and thank you all for kind of explaining and articulating on the record last meeting about why that rule adjusting the letters of recommendation, why you all weren't in favor in that. As I've mentioned before, I'm an attorney that has learned way more about the funeral industry than I thought I ever would, but I know there's way more for me to learn, and being able to go back to all the people who make those decisions and articulate this is the reasons why they weren't in favor of it. This is what they were worried about. These were their concerns. That makes it way easier to communicate that to them. So wanted to thank you all for that. And in light of that, you will notice that change is no longer in this document. So not even on the table. We're not changing it. It's going to remain 2 letters of recommendation from individuals licensed as funeral directors and or embalmers. The other is the military spouse rule that was being repealed out of this group. Again, you will not notice it in there at all, which means it is not being changed anymore at all. So the reason why for that is the reason it was being repealed in the first place was that it was contained in statute elsewhere. So it was a little redundant in rules. If there's a statute that just says this applies to all regulatory boards. But after our higher ups have kind of discussed maybe thinking of a more holistic approach for what the department plans on doing for that being present in statute already, I think the fear was that we would do something in rules, we'd get to through the 20 plus steps, and then we'd have it done, and then someone would say, okay, now we need to change it. Now we need to do something different. So we're just leaving that language as it is right now while the people way above me up the hierarchy decide what we're going to do kind of long term with that, how it's going to look in rule, if just where we're going to go from there. So that's been taken out of these rules. Like I said, the language is just going to stay the exact same way it is currently. So those are the only two updates. Again, more so of things staying the same as opposed to changing, but just wanted to be able to provide you all with that information and to if answer any questions you may have, and at the end to request for a motion to set a rulemaking hearing as soon as possible in the future.
Does that require a vote? Okay. So, Mr. Bryant, are you completed with your report?
I am, yes.
All right. Do I hear a motion to accept Mr. Bryant's report?
So moved.
Mr. Wheeler, a second by Mr. Naylor beside me. Is that correct, Mr. Naylor?
Yes.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Bryant, for your report. Motion carried. Mr. Gribble.
Thank you. This is the opportunity for the board to select one person, one of their members, to attend what's called Regulatory Board Service 101. It's a grant recipient thing from the International Conference for Funeral Service Examining Boards. This would take place on Tuesday, October the 1st, 2024, be in Providence, Rhode Island. And there's some, the first step of this would be for the board to select someone. It would be subject to approval by the administration of the person being able to attend. So the selection doesn't guarantee automatically that you would attend. As you noticed in the information we sent to you earlier, the cutoff date for the conference had said the deadline to apply was August 11th. I communicated with them earlier, told them our board meeting was not by August 11th, that was not practical for this board to select someone by then. So they assured me that there's a few more days left, and if the board should decide to select someone today, then I'll coordinate with that person and make sure that you get the information there. There are guidelines, policies, and procedures for the board training grant program. Certain things that have to be done in a certain way, as always. So there is a possibility, not a guarantee, but the possibility that this will be offered again, maybe to another person in February of next year. So I know that Mr. Naylor has attended, Mr. Berry's attended earlier. I think those are the only two members of this board that have attended in recent past. If you've got other questions, I'll be glad to answer them, but basically, it's a decision of the board if you want to select someone, and if you do, who that person is.
Due to my term ending, I would open the floor to anyone that is interested. I have punched one to my left, and he can't do it.
Small funeral homes require my presence.
I understand.
What are the dates again, Mr. Gribble?
The training is October the 1st, 2024. So my understanding is that you would travel the day before, and then the travel back the day after. Probably be a 3-day commitment, probably. Because they do want you there for the entire session of the training. It's an all-day training class.
That's during fall break, and
Yeah.
I'm afraid if I would like to go, but I'm afraid that
Yeah.
that would be an issue with my
Pay
spouse.
for you, you can pay for the rest of your family. I might enjoy that.
They don't want my heathens at the place thing.
Mr. Wheeler, would you like to have the opportunity to go to Providence, Rhode Island, and learn more about being on a board?
I'd be very honored. I appreciate that very much, and it should work with my schedule. Oh, sorry. I would be very honored and appreciate it very much. It would work with my schedule. I'll just tell the owner of the funeral home I'm on vacation.
Just let him know Miss Pam said.
I will.
Okay.
That has a lot of influence, by the way, with him.
Yeah,
It
I'm sure.
does.
So, Mr. Gribble, we'd like to place the name Tim Wheeler. This is not confirming that you will be accepted on this. It's just we are presenting the name Tim Wheeler from East Tennessee to represent the board. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Nash,
Second.
second by Mr. Lee. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Wheeler. The board has passed that motion, and we appreciate you doing your duty for the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the board very much, Mr. Gerbil also, Mr. Bryant.
At this time, you want to say
I
something?
got a little new business if
Yes,
they're,
sure,
only if they're
sure.
done.
Yeah.
Y'all have anything else right now? Normally this time of the year, we have the past board members luncheon. I don't think it's too early to kind of figure out after a board meeting when we'll have that. I know Miss Pam had told me this morning, August, she'll be incapacitated.
Nope, just, I'll be here.
Rolling or walking, you'll be here.
I'll be here.
But what we normally do is find a place to have lunch and invite them up and be after the board meeting on a Tuesday, kind of right after that. But if we can figure out a date, any of the board members you've talked to, Mr. Gribble, that may have a month that won't work?
In light of anticipating this, I contacted each of the three board members that rolled off on recently, the three past board members. One of them said that September would not be a good time for them. Another person said any of the three, either September, October, or November would be fine. And then another one did not give me a definitive answer. So, I guess based on, it was Mr. Harris, who was the immediate past president of the board, said that it would be better for him if it wasn't September. So you might want to, based on that, if you want to consider October or November.
That'll
that
give
might
us
be-
a little more planning time as well. I've got Mr. Nash on board to help me. He's a restaurant connoisseur up here. So. But since we meet again in September, and I don't think we have to vote on this now, but the folks watching at home, but maybe look at October after that meeting for planning that. And then maybe confirming at their next board meeting.
What's our meeting date in October?
October 8th.
That's our fall break, so Joseph will gladly come, Mr. Gribble, to eat.
November is November 12th.
That's the day after Veterans Day? What's the 11th?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if there's nothing that stands out to anybody, we can sum this up in our September meeting. But I just want to throw it out there, and that way it'll give the past board members that's listening to this kind of an idea to maybe holler or yay or nay.
Mr. Gribble, would you check with is it the three past presidents?
Well, there's one past president
I mean,
and two
board members.
And two board
that-
members, I'm
that
sorry,
went on.
yes. Could you check with, and remind us again, that's Mr. Harris, Ms.
Haynes,
Ms. Haynes,
Berry.
and
Mr.
Mr.
Berry.
Berry, yes. And check with their schedule to see how October 8th would
Okay.
work.
We'll be glad to do that.
Is there any other new business?
One more.
Yes?
I'm gonna get you out of here. I've been saving up.
No, you're good.
For the new board members, usually around this time of year, we just start thinking about the board positions for next year. Miss Pam, she was shorted a year, but she's going to be rotating off.
It's
And
absolutely fine.
We'll have a president, a vice president, and a CU liaison. And what we normally do under new business, if anybody is interested or would like to have their name thrown in the hat for one of those positions, that'll be coming up. So be something to think about.
Any other new business? Mr. Span, we'd like to say congratulations to you on your new appointed secretary position with National Funeral Directors Association. Congratulations from all of us. At this time, if you have not signed in and would like to make public comment, please respond at this time. Ms. Bohannon, do you have anyone that has signed up for comments?
No, I haven't.
Okay, all right. Any other business? If not, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Mr. Haynes and Mr. Naylor second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Then we'll see you guys in September. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Gribble, and Ms. Bohannon, as always.